Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. The hotel removed the front desk. It did not remove the human. That is the point. The front desk disappeared. Human judgment did not. A front desk is one way to serve a guest. It supports check-in, access, questions, requests, service recovery, and the normal movement around a stay. But the desk itself is not hospitality. The objective is still the guest. Once you separate the service objective from the familiar service point, a more useful leadership question shows up. If the process can carry most of the work, when does a person actually need to step in? Not because somebody is uncomfortable with technology, not because the process looks different, not because a manager believes leadership only counts when they personally touch the problem. When does the operating condition require human judgment, authority, trust? Technical skill, relationship, or access that the normal process cannot provide. That is what manual engagement is really about at the recognition level. Some leaders keep pushing a problem through process long after process has stopped being useful. Another message, another form, another handoff, another person added to the conversation. The work is moving between people, but the blocker is sitting exactly where it started. At that point, the email chain has handled the problem so thoroughly, it is qualified for late checkout. Other leaders go the opposite direction. Something becomes unusual and they take over the entire problem. Now the manager is talking to the guest, checking the room, calling housekeeping, contacting maintenance, changing the reservation, making the recovery decision, and trying to run the rest of the operation at the same time. Take that logic one step farther and the scene writes itself. The manager is sprinting through the lobby with a radio in one hand and a room key in the other, approving service recovery by telepathy, while 6 capable employees wait for the sacred manager to finish being the hotel's central nervous system. If that person goes to the bathroom, apparently the property enters continuity operations. Funny picture, real consequence. One blocker just consumed the person responsible for the rest of the operation. Neither response is strong. One avoids the blocker, the other turns one blocker into a management takeover. Manual engagement sits between those two failures. Sometimes process has carried the work as far as process can carry it. One point is still stuck. That point requires the right person. Put the right person on the blocker, then return the work to the lowest risk path. And the right person does not automatically mean the most senior person. It does not automatically mean the manager. It means the person whose capability actually matches what is preventing movement. The Foreside Inn in Kittery, Maine gives us a useful current example. Based on what is publicly known, the 24-room boutique property operates without a traditional staffed front desk. Guests can use self-check-in and check-out, receive personal access codes, and contact a remote concierge team by call, text, or email. Public reporting described a 4-person concierge team supporting guest needs remotely. The interesting part is not what disappeared, it is what remained. Guest needs, service recovery, judgment, and human connection remained. The operating model changed where human attention was required. Routine work could move through routine process. Then when something moved outside that normal path, a person could engage. Public reporting also described an example at a related property, Rockport House, which operates using a similar model. A family had forgotten an essential item for a newborn. General Manager Christina Lehman arranged a delivery without physically being at the property. That example matters because the response did not require somebody sitting behind a desk all day waiting for that exact situation to occur. The normal process carried normal work. Then a specific guest need appeared and human judgment entered where it added value. I am not saying Foreside Inn uses the direct action system. I am not saying they used manual engagement. The public record does not establish that. I am saying the operating condition gives us a clean way to examine the problem. Manual engagement is designed to help a leader recognize. Process should carry what process can carry. Human capability should enter when the blocker requires it. Those are not competing ideas. Good process and good human judgment should protect each other. Process keeps routine work from depending on individual heroics. Human judgment keeps process from becoming an excuse for doing nothing when the situation no longer fits. Hospitality makes that distinction visible because the guest is usually experiencing the consequence while you are still deciding what to do. The guest does not care how efficient the process normally is. They care whether somebody can help them with the problem they have right now. At the same time, that does not give a leader permission to abandon procedure, exceed authority, or drag the most senior person available into every guest exception. Let's put this inside an illustrative hospitality situation. This is not something I am claiming happened at Foreside Inn or Rockport House. Imagine you are the evening guest services lead supporting a small hotel that uses digital check-in. Most of the shift is normal. Guests receive their access information. Rooms move through the normal room status process. Routine requests come through the guest service channel. Someone asks about parking. Somebody else needs extra towels. Housekeeping gets a request. Another guest wants a dinner recommendation. The process is doing what it is supposed to do. Then one guest arrives and their assigned room cannot be used because of an unexpected maintenance condition. The specific maintenance issue is not the lesson. What matters is that the room should not be occupied. You confirm the condition through the approved path. Now you have a guest standing inside a real service failure. The property is nearly full. They have already traveled. They expected the room to be ready. They want to know what happens next. You can see the reservation, verify the room is unavailable, check remaining inventory, contact the appropriate teams, and handle normal service recovery inside your authority. But there is a limit. Maybe the recovery requires moving the guest to another property, approving an expense above your authority, or making a commitment you are not authorized to make. Now look closely at what happened. The problem did not become impossible. It narrowed. Most of the guest interaction can still be handled at your level. One decision cannot. That is different from saying, I cannot handle this guest problem. You can handle a lot of it. The blocker is authority. That is a much stronger read because now we know what is missing. The first instinct is still probably to keep trying. I understand that. You want to help. You do not want the guest waiting. You do not want to call somebody else unless you need to. And if you are building confidence as a leader, part of you may be thinking, I should be able to figure this out myself. So you check inventory again. You send another message, you call housekeeping, you look for another approved recovery option. You search the reservation system one more time. You keep working because effort feels responsible. For a while it is, but there is a point where more effort stops creating useful options. You know the room is unavailable. You know the inventory. You know what options exist inside your authority. The guest still needs a decision that you cannot make. At that point, the blocker is not effort. It is not information. It is not whether you care enough. The missing capability is authority. That is where leaders usually split in two directions. One avoids the person with authority because asking for help feels like failure. So the guest waits while the lead searches for an answer that does not exist inside their decision rights. Frustration rises, pressure rises, and now the lead starts feeling tempted to promise things they cannot guarantee. Maybe the lead promises another property or an expense before either has been authorized because doing something feels better than admitting the limit. The intent can be good. The control is still weak. Good intent does not create authority you do not possess. You cannot manifest approval because the guest looks disappointed. This is hospitality, not a seance with a reservation number. Then there is the opposite response, immediate surrender. The lead realizes the decision exceeds their authority and says a manager has to handle it. Then mentally they leave the problem. Now the guest starts over. The manager has to rebuild the operating picture. Is the room definitely unavailable? Did we check inventory? What did housekeeping say? What has already been communicated? What options have been considered? The senior person is rebuilding information the guest services lead already possessed. That is not targeted engagement. That is transferring the whole problem because one piece crossed an authority boundary. You can see why both responses happen. One feels like ownership. I will solve this myself. The other feels like compliance. This exceeds my authority, so I will give it to somebody who has more. Manual engagement asks for a more precise read. What can you still own? What specifically can you not move? What capability does that blocker require? Who has that capability? You could call the manager and hand over everything, but that is not really the decision. The decision is what part of the problem actually requires the manager. You remain the guest services lead. You still own the communication you are capable of owning. You know the reservation. You know what happened. You protect the guest from having to restart the story. Then the person with the required authority engages where that authority matters. Maybe they approve relocation. Maybe they approve a recovery expense. Maybe they contact another property. Maybe they determine a different approved option makes more sense. Their engagement is focused on the blocker. Then the work moves again. You continue communicating with the guest. The reservation follows the approved path. Housekeeping and maintenance continue owning their work. And the senior leader gets out of the problem when their part is complete. That is fundamentally different from taking over everything. This is where manual engagement can get misunderstood. People hear the word manual and think hands-on. They assume the leader personally does something. Sometimes that is true. The leader may be the person with the required authority, judgment, relationship, skill, or access. But manual engagement is not permission for a leader to jump into every problem. It is not micromanagement with better branding. The point is matching human capability to the blocker. The right person might be the guest services lead, property manager, maintenance lead, relationship owner, reservation specialist, or whoever actually possesses the capability the blocker requires. The title is secondary. The capability the person has to match the blocker. That question matters because process cycling looks like work. Everybody is busy. The lead sends another message, someone forwards it, a supervisor checks a system, the issue gets copied into another channel, the guest receives another apology, somebody checks policy, somebody else asks who normally handles it. 10 minutes become 20. The guest is still waiting. And everybody may genuinely be trying to help. This does not require lazy people or incompetent people. Capable people can work very hard while the blocker remains untouched because none of the activity introduced the capability required to move it. More process does not create missing authority. More email does not create trust. More handoffs do not create technical skill. More people in a conversation do not create system access. Another meeting does not manufacture judgment. If the blocker requires a particular human capability, the process eventually has to reach that capability. Otherwise, you are orbiting the problem. At some point, the issue has been forwarded so many times, it has more internal travel history than the guest. Hospitality makes that visible because the guest is standing inside the delay. Other guests are still arriving. Other requests continue. The shift does not freeze because one guest has a complicated problem. The guest services lead cannot let one exception consume the entire operating picture, but you also cannot rush the guest because the shift is busy. So the leader has to separate the guest problem from the blocker inside the guest problem. The guest problem may include an unavailable room, frustration, reservation changes, communication, relocation, transportation, and service recovery. The blocker may be one approval. If you treat the entire guest problem as the blocker, you escalate the entire thing. If you identify the actual blocker, you can engage the right capability precisely. That protects the guest and protects the operation around the guest. Now look at what happens if a leader never learns that distinction. Every unusual guest request becomes a manager issue. People learn where their authority ends, but they never learn what responsibility remains after that boundary. A guest request falls outside policy, a reservation becomes unusual, a recovery exceeds normal authority, or a vendor problem appears. Call the manager, and eventually the manager is not leading the operation. The manager is a human exception queue. By this point, the process has discovered management the way a toddler discovers the word why. Every answer generates another manager request, and that can look like strong leadership because everybody needs that person. It is not. The operation is becoming dependent. Complexity flows upward and stays there. Everyone below the manager becomes less capable of owning the parts they actually can control. Now, the opposite pattern is just as weak. Someone decides independence means never asking for help. Escalation feels like weakness. So they make commitments they cannot guarantee, interpret policies they do not own, attempt technical actions they are not qualified to perform, or enter trust-sensitive conversations without the right relationship. That is not empowerment. That is unauthorized improv with access to the master key. Good leadership lives between those two failures. Own what you can responsibly own. Recognize what you cannot responsibly decide. Bring the right capability in where it is needed. Keep the engagement as narrow as the blocker allows. Then continue leading. I have learned to respect that distinction more over time because competence and independence are easy to confuse. You become more capable and think, I should need less help. Then actual responsibility teaches you something different. Bigger responsibility usually creates more dependencies, not fewer. No leader has every authority, relationship, technical skill, permission, and piece of information. So the standard cannot be, can I personally solve everything that reaches me? That is a terrible standard. The better standard is whether you can recognize what the situation requires and connect the problem to the right capability without losing ownership or control. That is a much more useful form of independence. You are independent enough to lead what belongs to you. You are disciplined enough to know when part of the problem does not. And that sounds simple when we say it cleanly, but under pressure people start proving things they do not need to prove. I can handle this. I do not need the manager. I do not want to bother somebody. Or the opposite. That is above me. Not my problem anymore. Both are shortcuts around judgment. The better question is what the blocker actually requires. Bring that back to the Foreside Inn model. The interesting part is not simply that there is no traditional staffed front desk. The interesting part is what that forces us to reconsider about where people create value. If normal arrival can move through digital access, a person does not have to manually perform every routine transaction just to prove hospitality exists. Human attention can be concentrated where human capability matters more. A guest need becomes unusual. A relationship matters. Someone needs judgment. Service recovery requires discretion. The system needs access or authority the guest does not have. That is where targeted human engagement creates value. Do not turn that into every hotel should eliminate its front desk. That would be a ridiculous conclusion. Different properties have different guests, brands, staffing, expectations, and operating constraints. The leadership lesson is narrower. Do not use a person where process is sufficient simply because that is how the operation has always worked. Do not keep using process where the blocker requires a person simply because the process normally works. Read the condition you actually have. That is where manual engagement becomes relevant. Manual engagement is used when a blocker inside the problem requires the right person's judgment, authority, trust, skill, relationship, or access. The blocker is real. The objective still has to move. Normal process cannot clear this specific point. That does not mean the entire problem gets escalated. The guest needs another person. More precisely, the blocker needs the right person. If normal process can still carry the issue, let it work. If another path can carry the objective without human engagement at that point, another deepened strategy may be better. If the condition itself requires direct action, manual engagement may not be the main answer. If you do not know enough to identify what is stuck, then more analysis may be required. But once you understand the blocker and the missing control is human capability, continuing to add process starts wasting time. The problem is not waiting for more effort. It is waiting for the right capability. The wrong person can make the situation worse too. Go back to the room scenario. Suppose the person you bring in has authority to approve financial recovery, but does not understand the property condition. They make a promise without confirming another property can receive the guest. Excellent. The wrong capability arrived with full confidence in a manager title. You cleared the authority blocker and created an execution problem. Or maybe somebody has strong relationship trust but cannot authorize the commitment being discussed. They calm the guest down and create an expectation the operation cannot meet. Or you pull maintenance into a guest recovery conversation because maintenance understands why the room is unavailable. That does not make maintenance responsible for relocation or guest compensation. Asking maintenance to solve a service authority problem is basically asking the smoke detector to approve the refund. Relevant to the emergency. Absolutely the wrong department. Technical knowledge and service authority are not interchangeable. This is why manual engagement does not mean bring in somebody important. Authority against an authority blocker. Technical skill against a technical blocker. Relationship trust where trust is what prevents movement. Access where access is the problem. Judgment where the standard rule no longer gives the answer. Then when the blocker is handled, give the work back. Do not let temporary engagement become permanent ownership. The manager approves relocation. That does not mean the manager handles every message to the guest. The maintenance lead confirms the technical condition. That does not make maintenance the guest service owner. The reservation specialist corrects a record using access the lead does not have. That does not mean the reservation specialist owns the rest of the stay. The blocker clears. The work returns to the appropriate path. That handback matters because it prevents every exception from creating dependency. It also develops people. The guest services lead learns where their authority ended without learning that the entire problem belonged to somebody else. They stay connected to the outcome. They carry what remains theirs. That is judgment development. Now follow the weak path all the way through. The guest encounters a problem. Normal process cannot resolve one point. The lead keeps trying anyway. Time passes. Frustration rises. Other service work starts waiting. Eventually, someone with authority enters late. They rebuild the situation. The guest is more emotional. The recovery may cost more. The manager takes over because the situation feels urgent. The lead steps backward. The guest learns the first person could not really help. The lead learns complex problems belong to the manager. The manager learns if I do not personally take over, this goes badly. Do that enough times and the operation creates a bottleneck. Everybody starts calling leadership. Reverse it. The guest has the problem. The lead identifies the authority blocker. The lead protects the guest relationship and engages the person with authority. That person handles the decision. The decision returns to the lead. The lead communicates the approved path and carries the guest through the next movement. The manager leaves the problem. The operation continues. The lead gained experience. The guest received a controlled answer. The senior person applied authority exactly where authority was required. That is cleaner. And it is fairer. You are not asking the guest services lead to produce a decision they were never authorized to make. You are also not stripping them of responsibility because somebody else owns one decision. If you expect a person to own an outcome, give them the authority, information, support, and resources appropriate to their part of the work. When their authority ends, do not punish them for recognizing it, and do not let them use that limit as an excuse to abandon everything else they still control. Responsibility and authority have to be connected honestly. Now connect this lightly to the larger direct action system. CSA matters before manual engagement because the leader needs a clean enough read to identify what is actually stuck. Saying the guest has a problem is too broad. The room cannot be occupied. The reservation is visible. Communication works. Inventory can be checked. The guest services lead can handle normal recovery activity. One recovery decision exceeds the lead's authority. That cleaner read gives Deepen better information. Deepen helps you navigate what kind of problem you actually have instead of treating every problem like it requires the same response. The guest needs an answer, so this is not something you can simply postpone. Another route may still require the same authority decision. The missing human capability is the limiting factor. That is where manual engagement enters the read. Pro matters because the engagement itself can create consequences. What happens if the employee makes an unauthorized commitment? What happens if the guest waits another 20 minutes? What happens if a receiving property is promised something it cannot provide? What happens if every exception lands on one manager? TMC matters because manual engagement gets weak when ownership becomes fuzzy. Who is handling the blocker? What remains with the guest services lead? What needs to come back? Who owns the next movement? That is enough system connection here. The broader direct action system supports the tool. Manual engagement remains the point. Now take this into your own environment. Maybe a retail customer request exceeds your approval level. Maybe a restaurant recovery needs the general manager's discretion. Maybe a vendor issue needs the relationship owner. A system issue needs access you do not have. or a technical problem needs an actual specialist. Different environments, same recognition problem. What exactly is stuck? What part can I still own? What capability is missing? Who actually has it? Once that blocker clears, where should the work return? Notice what is not on that list. Who can I dump this on? Who is the highest ranking person available? Who can make this disappear for me? Those are not manual engagement questions. The objective is not escaping responsibility. The objective is getting the right capability onto the point that cannot move without it. There's one more signal I want you watching. If the same person is required every single time, you may have found a different problem. Maybe the manager is the only person authorized to make routine decisions that could reasonably be delegated. Maybe nobody else has been trained. Maybe permissions are unnecessarily concentrated. Maybe the process itself is weak. Manual engagement should not become a permanent workaround for a badly designed operation. If every exception needs the same person, the manager has stopped being a leader and become middleware wearing business casual. What we need to understand is the part that matters is why the operating system keeps creating the same dependency. For this episode, keep the field standard simple. Do not keep pushing a blocker through process when process cannot supply what is missing. Do not take over an entire problem because one point requires your involvement. Do not ask someone to make a decision outside their authority because the guest is standing there and the moment feels uncomfortable. Do not give away responsibility simply because your authority reached its limit. Identify what is actually stuck. Identify the capability that point requires. Put the right person on that blocker. Then get the work moving again through the lowest risk suitable path. The hotel removed the front desk. It did not remove the human. That is the discipline. Process should carry what process can carry. People should bring judgment where judgment is required. Leaders need to know the difference. Your authority ending does not mean your responsibility disappeared. Asking for the right capability does not mean giving away ownership. And being the person with authority does not mean you inherit the whole problem. The right person handles the blocker, then the operation moves again. When you are ready to go deeper with manual engagement, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course connected to manual engagement, and deepen and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. Thanks for listening to the briefing.